I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. AI Dynamics is seeking to make AI accessible. Though its NeoPulse platform can be used across industries, the life sciences is one of the key markets the company is targeting, with its technology being used to do everything from target identification for drug development to diagnosing and triaging TB patients by the sounds of their cough. We spoke to Rajeev Dutt, CEO and president of AI Dynamics, about the company's core AI technology, how it seeks to make AI accessible, and why he believes it can transform drug development in healthcare by moving the needle on cost. Rajeev, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. It's great to be here.
We're going to talk about AI Dynamics, how it's working to make AI accessible, and what it's doing particularly in the area of healthcare. Let's start with NeoPulse. What is it and how does it work?
Well, NeoPulse is a platform that we have developed over the last several years that does several things. The first is it automates a large part of the process of building out machine learning models, which means we can assist with marshaling the data and preparing the data for machine learning, use the onboard AI to determine the right set of algorithms, all the way to deploying and managing the AI once it's in production. So kind of soup to nuts machine learning development and also management. So in some sense, it has a kind of like what we call ML ops, a machine learning operations, so built into the system. However, one of the key things that we have also done is we have focused on certain areas. So our platform is kind of a Swiss Army knife in many ways. You can work with many different data types. You can work with image, traditional data analytics. You can work with sound. You can work with DICOM images in healthcare, and increasingly now with nucleic acids and proteomics and things like that, so proteins, nucleic acids, and so on. So we support data types like that as well as models for those particular purposes. And so over the last year or so, we have increased the healthcare side of our platform dramatically, including things like NLP to read doctors' charts, to using DICOM analysis to basically understand PET and CT images. And we have been working very closely with a biotechnology company working with on key aspects of nucleic acid, so certain key properties, identifying those using machine learning, identifying certain key properties of RNA, and also with drug discovery. So in particular, identifying specific drug targets. Those are things that we have been very focused on. So so essentially using our platform, long story short, is our platform is all about making AI accessible. We make it accessible to almost anybody, and we've had high school students use our platform quite successfully, but it can be ramped up all the way for large enterprises to use it. And certainly and in particular, we're very interested and very passionate about the healthcare sector, because it fits in with our overall vision and purpose as a company, which is to effectively democratize AI, but democratize AI in an ethical way.
I assume I've been operating under a big misconception about AI, but I think of these systems as being fit for purpose. A platform used for drug development, I would imagine, would be different than one used for diagnostics, or for that matter, to determine what music someone might like, or how to design a jet engine. What allows your system to work across virtually any application?
Well, there are two things actually. The first is that we have so firstly we support many different data types, and so which means that we have algorithms that allow us to pre-process a lot of data types, which means that we can process nucleic acids. So you just essentially dump sort of nucleic acid sequences into our platform, and we're able to kind of work with that. We have algorithms for working with images to work with DICOM data and three-dimensional images, like working with voxels and so on. So that's the first element. We have a broad variety of algorithms to select from and ways to kind of pre-process and prepare the data. The second thing is that we also have what we call an AI to build an AI, or AutoML feature, which is pretty sophisticated. It has a pretty broad range of algorithms that we have amassed over the years, and we're continuing to develop and evolve. So always staying state of the art, as well as a bunch of pre-trained models and so on that we've added to the mix that allow us to very quickly adapt our system to almost any new vertical. So which means that right now we're very focused on the healthcare sector, but tomorrow, for example, we might be able to do things in the cybersecurity domain, or in AI-driven IT ops or something like that. And that's certainly well within the capabilities of what our platform can do.
What does it take to set up a system for a specific use, and how much back end programming is required? How much end user training is required?
So it would depend. It's like many other statements. It depends on what you're trying to do. So if it comes with, if you're trying to solve some problems that there already exists sort of a pathway to solving those problems, then it's relatively straightforward. The whole thing from start to finish, like you can actually build and deploy an AI model in a matter of well, not including the training, but actually creating the algorithms, prepare the data, and deploying. If you take all those pieces together, you can do that within about 15 minutes, and then the training itself takes several. What depends on the power of your machine and how many iterations or epochs you're basically running your model through. But the process is very simple. So for things that are more complicated, things that, for example, may rely on multiple AI models that you're stringing together, it could be that there are some intermediate steps and so on. Obviously, those are going to take longer, but the machine learning components of that are things that we address and things that make that relatively straightforward. So in some cases, like to solve some of these problems, you need to build several machine learning models. So one of the drug discovery projects involved building several machine learning models, all the way from target identification to validation, etc. So all that kind of is kind of like comes into a box, and that can take a month, several months, to be able to accomplish that. So I think in this case, it took about 4 months. But it's still kind of a record in quotation marks compared to what it would normally take if you were to kind of go out there and start from scratch, or start from Python, or even working with some vendors who are specialized in those areas. But we have the flexibility that once you've built this within the NeoPulse system, then you can easily then integrate that with the next stage. So for example, it's great to identify targets, but for example, doing lead optimization or lead discovery, those are kind of like the next logical steps there. Then those are things that you would want to you'd need to kind of build models for, and then continue to evolve that. For medical imaging, it's a much more straightforward problem. We have already a number of the algorithms built into the system. So which means that in many cases, it's a simple drag and drop. So you literally drop the images into the system, as long as they're currently like in the right folders. You just drag the images into the machine, and with a little bit of tweaking, which normally takes about 15-20 minutes, you can then get the machine to start training. We have two ways of using our system. One is actually three ways. One is the pure auto mode, so which means that you rely on the machine learning system itself to generate AI for your, like, to build out the right set of algorithms, architectures. The second approach is what we call guided AI development. So which means that you build out your solution and the system will recommend potential, like for example, they'll say, okay, you want to try this pre-trained model, and if with this pre-trained model you want to add this layer and this layer and this layer. So we kind of like guide you through the process of building out the AI model. And then there's a third method, which is, of course, which is where you do everything manually. But even there we can help, because what we do is we have a specialized language that we call the NeoPulse modeling language, which can reduce the amount of coding from several hundred lines of code to like around 30 lines of code, which of course simplifies your task as well. So, so because of that, we are able to reduce the amount of time. It also reduce the amount of errors in the process, and reduce the amount of kind of effort and skill sets that are required. So we are targeting our platform more towards domain experts and not to machine learning people. So machine learning people are very comfortable using traditional methods like PyTorch and so on, but the domain experts are the ones who typically have the knowledge that's required to build out the sophisticated algorithms that are needed, but they don't necessarily have the technical skills to build out the machine learning models themselves.
In March, AI Dynamics announced that its system is being used by the Rapid Research and Diagnostic Developments for TB Network, R2D2. This is part of their scale up for your TB Diagnostic Solution Program. This is hosted by QB3 and the UCSF Rosenman Institute. What is R2D2 TB Network?
So it's a kind of a global collaboration. You have the University of Heidelberg, the UCSF, and as well. And so what it is about developing treatments and diagnostic procedures for tuberculosis, which is one of the, turns out, and I was actually really surprised to know this, it is the leading cause of death in the world. I didn't know that until we started entering the program. And it is really to develop the tools and diagnostics and also potential therapies, and in a way that is relatively low cost and accessible to the places where such treatments and diagnostics are most needed.
It's kind of astounding. You know, I think most people living in the United States may be unaware of how significant a public health problem TB represents, but give us some of the numbers.
It represents about 1.4 million deaths per year, most of them in the developing world. The number of cases in the US is substantially lower, as one might expect, but in places like sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Asia, it is a dominant, it's an extremely prevalent source of, it's a very prevalent cause of death.
Your AI systems are being used to triage patients by analyzing the sound of their coughs. Why is it important to triage patients?
Well, in order to triage, so basically, depending upon the stage that they're in and the level of sick, so some people are kind of in later stages and are more in need of therapy and treatment. People who are in the earlier stages, perhaps it's not so critical. So understanding sort of what stage the particular the patient is in is effectively a way to kind of determine, okay, this person desperately needs treatment now versus, yeah, we can be more selective. And also the treatment regime changes. So you're either, so the type of drugs and the course of drugs that you might be using will also change. But triaging the patients, basically allowing the cough by detecting the cough and determining what stage they're in, the severity of the infection, it allows you to kind of say, okay, we're going to allocate the treatment to these patients first, and the ones that are secondary or not so poorly off at the beginning. And then there's some people who develop sort of a latent case, which sort of lingers, but never really develops into full-fledged tuberculosis. They become carriers of the disease, can potentially are able to spread that infection, but at the same time, they may not necessarily be as at risk as some of the people who are in the later stages.
It's interesting to think you can train an AI system to do this by the sound of a cough. What's the argument for this being a better approach than more traditional ways a doctor might determine the severity of a case?
Well, I think the biggest aspect is the cost of doing so. So the traditional way, so typically the way doctors will do it is using a stethoscope anyway. That would be sort of the first way, so detecting sort of sounds in the lung. Of course, you can use X-rays and CT scans and so on, but those increase in cost. So from the stethoscope upwards to the CT, it's a never escalating cost, which is oftentimes not available. On the other hand, if you have a cell phone, which with a microphone, and the person just coughs into that, you can actually listen to that cough and be able to diagnose it. That's really like pennies. So it's the cost of downloading the app and somebody there to kind of listen to it. So the AI will make a sort of a preliminary diagnosis and say, okay, this person might be at a later stage or an early stage of tuberculosis, and therefore will require treatment. So it basically gives, firstly, more accessibility. It requires a lower skill level to use, and also allows the tuberculosis treatment to go into places that are normally inaccessible or very hard to access for traditional healthcare providers. So which means that, I mean, especially in places like Africa, where you have cell phone networks that are ubiquitous, the availability of this treatment then suddenly becomes possible to even the remote villages and places like that.
And what's been done to validate this? What's known about the accuracy of this approach compared to a doctor using a stethoscope?
Well, the preliminary results are encouraging. We believe that, so we're continuing to develop the model, and we believe that we'll be able to increase the accuracy to that or exceeding that of a human doctor. But at the moment, we're currently in the training process. And prior to this, we were also looking at using blood samples and using machine learning to look at certain key factors in the blood, not actually looking at doing PCR tests or something like that, but actually looking at blood samples. And we were able to get an extremely high accuracy for those results. For these results, we have a fairly high confidence that we're going to get to something as good or even better, but we're still in the process of kind of getting there.
You had an 88% accuracy on your blood test.
Correct.
Is that still being developed and used?
So the blood test has so we got some brilliant results from that. The challenge with the blood test is that it's still, the costs are still not as low as what we would like, because at the end of the day, even though we're not doing PCR tests and it's still accessible to a lot of clinics, it still does not get us to where we want to go, which is basically have a ubiquitous test that can easily be deployed more broadly. And so the blood test side would be something that we'll probably put on hold until what we'd like to do is focus on this, because we believe that the cough listening system has much broader reach than the blood testing one does. That would be probably the next one. So if we were to develop a program around this, it would be first the cough side and then the blood test side. So maybe the two kind of support each other. So if you identify patients from the cough that have a high likelihood of having this, then the next thing would be to draw a blood sample from them, because just drawing the blood sample and then processing it is expensive. So if you can already narrow down or filter the number of people who have to go through that, that's a huge step forward.
And what's the path forward to making this available broadly?
So what we're going to be doing is, so over the next year or so, we will be continuing to, we're currently obtaining more and more data, which is key for a lot of machine learning projects. So, or going back to an earlier question, in terms of accessibility, our system is very accessible, but the key thing that's we're always data hungry, and we're developing algorithms to reduce the amount of data that's needed, but still we need data. So we're basically accumulating more and more data for this project, and so we believe that we will have a trained system, a fully trained system within the next year, and then a kind of a POC app within about 6 months after that. So so probably about 18 months, I'd say we'll have something out there.
You talked about the wide range of applications within healthcare alone that NeoPulse can be used for. How is it being used for in the case of drug development?
Well, in the drug development space, there's several areas where we've already been involved with. One is basically to understand certain key attributes of RNA sequences. So one of the things, so there are different types of RNA sequences and different types of RNA. And what we, for example, were interested in was looking at, so we were working with a biotechnology company, and they're interested in certain key aspects that would allow us to regulate the production of certain types of proteins. And so using machine learning, we were able to identify those attributes and do it better than anyone else could, which really impressed them. And then the second part of that, which is the next stage, is to kind of work on target discovery. So identifying specific gene targets that are responsible for properties of cancers, or in this particular case, it's for cancer, but where it could potentially also be used for any kind of other diseases like autoimmune disorders and so on. And then the next stage after that, which is kind of what we're in the process of developing, is to identify a way to determine using machine learning to identify the right set of molecules, and then that might potentially be used to target that the sort of the gene expression pathway that has been identified. And so AI can be used in almost every stage of the process of drug development. So from the earlier stages for target discovery, so then lead discovery, lead optimization, then you have what's called ADMET, where you determine the safety of the drug, and then kind of the preclinical trials. So being able to identify the right set of patients, identifying biomarkers, all of these tasks can be done by machine learning. And we estimate that from that, we would be able to cut down the amount of time taken from something like 15 years down to less than to almost 7, so almost 50% reduction in time. But probably the most significant thing, and for me the most exciting thing, is the probability of success. So currently the success rate for developing new drugs is less than 10%. So it can be as low as 5%, and can cost over 2 billion to kind of put something on the market in over 17 years. If you can increase that confidence level to about 60%, even if it takes the same amount of time, it still will have a great impact. But we're talking about increasing the confidence level, but also decreasing the amount of time and cost by addressing each of the stages of the drug development process. So by streamlining the analytics steps to everything from the drug target identification all the way from patient identification, biomarker identification, streamlining the results, processing the field tests and drug trials, so all the evidence coming in. All of those steps can easily be, not easily, but they can all be accelerated by machine learning, and also be made to be less prone to error.
It seems to me that one of the big opportunities for AI in healthcare is really in supporting clinical decision making. I've seen a lot on the drug development side, much less on the clinical side. Are there Regulatory barriers or other considerations that have slowed such uses?
That is actually one of the major. So there's several challenges. One is the regulatory. There are regulatory issues because anytime you take something, make it as a clinical diagnostic system or treatment system, then immediately you have to go through the FDA processes. But there's also some other broader issues as well, which are things like just acceptance of physicians. Just even the acknowledgement or the realization that a system potentially might outperform a human is in itself sometimes alarming to some people, or the claim that a system can potentially outperform a human is already in itself alarming. The overall focus of our system is to develop these treatments as not necessarily the diagnostics and treatments is not necessarily so much as a as we're not planning to make that the final decision maker, but rather as a recommendation to, or as an aid to physicians. So which means that it's not responsible for the final diagnostic. It will largely be as an aid, just as the physician might look up something on Google. They would, for example, query this system, and this system comes back with, okay, yeah, it could be this. So, for example, we recently built an AI model that is able to detect COVID to an over 99% accuracy rate just by looking at the X-rays. So we currently outperform most human doctors. It's like I don't think that there are any human doctors who have that kind of accuracy. But we would never kind of push that through a clinical process simply because of the fact that it is very expensive and long. Like it's a grueling task. I mean, we would be happy to like license it through some third parties who would be interested in kind of taking this forward, but we ourselves don't want to do this. Instead, use it as an aid for physicians. So that's kind of like the where we see AI currently is mostly as an aid. So you hear about this in the RSNA, for example, the Radiological Society of North America. They have a big conference every year. And one of the things that a prominent theme that you keep hearing is computer-aided diagnostics. And this is something that you're going to see more and more of, where the machine is not the final arbiter, the decision maker. It's simply providing it as an aid to that process. So, for example, some of the private practices may have an AI that is used to triage or perhaps suggest that, hey, this person has a pulmonary edema, for example. And so basically the physician it goes off to a physician who might be an expert in kind of in that particular area of the body, and who's better able to then make the diagnostic. So that's kind of how I see AI today, and which basically is a much lower threshold for acceptance. But if we really want to go to the point where it becomes a final diagnostic solution, that would require firstly some changes to the way the FDA approves machine learning algorithms. And secondly, because one of the traits of machine learning, which is for me very exciting, is the ability to constantly retrain. So for example, when the AI makes a mistake, can you use that mistake to train that AI to make it smarter? But if the moment you change that AI, the problem is now, do I now have to submit that modified AI for regulatory approval? And if that's the case, then it becomes ever more challenging, because even what you've effectively done. So the way machines work is that you can train them, you can continue to improve their understanding of problems, just as you would, as a human would, when they kind of experience more and more problems. But the challenge that you'd have to deal with with machine learning models is that every time you modify the model or change it, or for example expand its diagnostic capabilities, that potentially would require new regulatory approval. So machine learning is still, I think there needs to be a certain amount of catch up by the regulatory agencies. It's not to say that there shouldn't be any regulations, obviously there should be, but to determine what the right balance is and kind of what is acceptable and what set of processes or procedures you might need to have in order to recognize that, okay, the updated model is potentially better and better performant than the old one. So maybe having some clear processes and procedures in mind to implement those might actually allow us to then place these AI models under regulatory control. But right now, I don't even think that there's a good framework there for this. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Ultimately, how do you expect AI to change the world of healthcare, and where do you see the biggest opportunities to apply AI?
Well, I think there are many different areas. The area that I'm most excited about is drug discovery. The reason for that is the complexity and expense of the process. The cost of developing new drugs is phenomenal. It's something that only the very largest drug companies can currently pay for. Granted that a very large part of that expense is regulatory, going back to the previous theme, it's still a very expensive process. And the other side of that is that there is a lot of data that's been accumulating over the years in terms of how drugs are behaving and how they like the interactions and indications and so on that are so understanding the drug interactions and so on. We're accumulating a bigger and bigger corpus of knowledge there. So I see that the ability of AI to impact the drug discovery part in particular is pretty immense. The second area, which is probably one that I'm very passionate about because I was actually born in Africa, so I have a particular interest in seeing that that access to medicine there is more broad scale. So we're able to scale it out to a much larger set of people. One of the things I'm very passionate about is the ability to lower the overall cost of healthcare. Which means primary care in particular. So TB is a great example, but are there some other examples like electronic stethoscopes that potentially could be used so that you require lower skill level technologies that exploit that are able to can work despite the supply chain issues and logistical issues that you might experience in these places. If you're able to develop a lower cost healthcare solutions to these countries, that would obviously be a big thing. But also at home, we also recognize, like in the United States and most of the Western, like the developed nations, we end up also seeing an increased cost of medicine as the population ages. And of course, as we're also seeing more diseases linked to obesity and so on. And to be able to, again, provide healthcare that is more accessible. We hear, of course, horror stories of people being bankrupted by their healthcare bills. So if we can kind of bring a lot of that into primary care and reduce the cost of primary care in the US and other developed countries, that would also, of course, have a huge impact on the quality of medicine. So I see that those two areas as being my primary interest points where I think that we can make the biggest difference. Of course, there are a lot of other areas like medical imaging and so on but in my opinion, in terms of impact, the primary care and accessible primary care and also drug discovery would be my two targets.
Rajeev Dutt, President and CEO of AI Dynamics. Rajeev, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.